On a typical afternoon in the heart of America, Rebecca, an elderly woman, had an emotional day watching her son Jeffrey grow from birth to adulthood. She found him on her doorstep and raised him for many years. However, when Jeffrey needed surgery, what the nurse found during the examination horrified Rebecca. Jeffrey was kicking pebbles on the dirt path leading to his house, a simple but warm place thanks to the constant presence of his mother, Rebecca. Each step he took created a fine cloud of dust, a symbol of all the rebellion he carried within him. As he approached the fence that marked the boundary of their small property, his gaze lingered on the old boards that Rebecca had repeatedly asked him to repair. "Jeffrey, I see you finally decided to look at the fence. It's time to fix it, isn't it, Mom?" Rebecca's voice, cautiously hopeful, rang out from where she stood, watching her son with concern and anticipation. Jeffrey sighed heavily, appearing nonchalant as he answered without turning to face his mother. "Oh, sure, because the fence is our most pressing problem, right? Maybe if we worried less about appearances and focused more on what really matters, you'd see the real problems here." His tone was a mixture of sarcasm and irritation, reflecting his constant struggle to get his mother to see his point, which he felt was too much about things that didn't matter. Rebecca took a step forward, concern clear on her aged face. "Jeffrey, it's not just about the fence. It's about learning to finish what you start, about taking care of this place we call home. You may not see it now, but these small responsibilities teach you important values." She tried to keep her voice steady, though she could feel the painful distance growing between them. Looking back at the fence, Jeffrey shook his head in disbelief. "What values are important, Mom?" "Like blindly following orders without question. Because that's what you're trying to teach me to follow, right? Follow orders without question." The rebellion in his voice was as clear as the hot air around them. Rebecca felt her heart tighten. "No, Jeffrey, I'm trying to teach you responsibility and caring. But it seems like everything I say just drives you further away." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion despite her efforts to remain strong. Jeffrey, realizing the impact of his words, hesitated for a moment. He appeared soft, but his pride and need to assert his independence quickly rose. "Maybe I'm distancing myself because there's nothing left for me here. Maybe I'm looking for something that this house, this fence can never give." With those heavy words filled with bitter conclusion, Jeffrey turned his back on Rebecca, leaving her with her thoughts and the pain of watching her son drift away. Not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. He was heading towards the town center to meet some friends. Hours passed as Rebecca waited for Jeffrey at home, and the late afternoon finally arrived when Jeffrey returned to the house he shared with his mother. Beside him was Angela, his new girlfriend, with her messy hair hanging over her shoulders and her clothes breaking the conservative standards of the area. She stood out against the simple backdrop of the small town, her carefree personality and smile as if she had no care in the world, fitting her desire to be a cool teenager. As they walked towards the house, Angela did not hesitate to make her presence known. Her loud laughter broke the usual evening silence. Jeffrey, though accustomed to Angela's behavior, kept his eyes on the house, anticipating Rebecca's reaction to his unexpected visitor. "Wait and see your mother's face when we get here. I bet she never expected you to bring someone like me," Angela said in a challenging tone, as if challenging not only Jeffrey but everything and everyone that represented the life he was trying to lead. Jeffrey returned a crooked smile, part of him relishing the prospect of shocking his choice, part of him worried about the consequences. "You'll be fine. Just try not to control yourself too much." His request sounded like a clumsy hope, knowing that asking Angela to adjust her behavior was like expecting the sun not to rise. Angela's presence immediately filled the space, her restless and uncontrolled energy palpable. "Mom, this is Angela, my new friend from the big city." I hope you and I get along," Jeffrey announced with a mix of challenge and calm in his voice. Rebecca, who had emerged from the kitchen at the sound of footsteps, paused in the doorway. Her eyes took in the young woman before her. Rebecca's reaction was immediate. Her maternal instincts warned her of the potentially disruptive influence Angela might have on Jeffrey. "Nice to meet you, Angela. I didn't know we had company today," she said politely, hiding her concern. Angela, on the other hand, did not miss the opportunity to assert her presence. "Oh, that was a last-minute decision. Life on the road doesn't allow for much planning. You know," she replied, sprawling on the sofa as if it were her own home, her shoes still dusty markings on the clean carpet. Rebecca sensed the disrespect in Angela's every word and action, a direct challenge to the order she cherished in her home. Jeffrey, sensing the rising tension, asked, "Mom, can we talk in the kitchen?" Rebecca hoped for some time alone with her son to express her concerns without directly confronting the visitor. "Jeffrey, I've always supported your choices, even when I disagree with them. But bringing Angela here without warning and the way she acted like that is what," Rebecca said, her voice filled with frustration and concern. Jeffrey faced his mother, already defensive. "Angela is different from you, Mom. She understands what it's like to want to escape this life, to feel trapped here. She makes me feel more alive," he reasoned, revealing more about his state of mind than Angela. Rebecca sighed, realizing the battle she was facing was not just against Angela's influence, but also against Jeffrey's growing desire for freedom that she feared he wasn't ready to face. "I just want you to be happy, Jeffrey." Rebecca sat in the living room, her eyes fixed on her son Jeffrey. She worried about his safety and responsibility. "Jeffrey, you know you want freedom, but I worry about you too," Rebecca began, her voice filled with sincerity. "Angela tends to take things lightly without thinking about the consequences, and that can be dangerous." Angela, with a gentle smile and a youthful glint in her eyes, was wandering around the living room decorations. Rebecca tried to maintain an inviting demeanor, hoping to build a bridge between the two. "Angela, I hope you're comfortable here. Why don't you show her around town before dinner?" she suggested, hoping to give them a chance to get to know each other better. Jeffrey, his gaze steady, looked at his mother with frustration and resistance. "You don't understand. With Angela, I feel like I can be myself without being judged or restricted. That's what I want," he said, his voice filled with a youthful yearning for freedom and acceptance. Rebecca felt her heartache as she watched the gap widen between her and her son's views. She knew that arguing would only drive Jeffrey further apart, but silence felt like a consent she didn't want to give. "Okay, Jeffrey, just be careful and don't let your friends or anyone else take away your essence and your roots," she finished, placing a soft kiss on her son's forehead in a gesture that conveyed all the love and concern that words could ever express. Meanwhile, in the living room, Angela had begun to explore the decorations with a carefree air. Rebecca tried to maintain a friendly and inviting demeanor. "Angela, I hope you're comfortable. Jeffrey, why don't you show her around town?" But he said, trying to build a bridge, knowing it might be difficult. Angela stood up with a bright smile on her face. "I'd love to see what your town has to offer," she replied confidently. "Okay, Jeffrey, I think it's time," she said, pulling Jeffrey's hand in a friendly manner, a gesture that Rebecca couldn't help but. However, there was something different about Angela's thoughts, a sudden rush to leave that Rebecca couldn't predict. As Angela pulled Jeffrey toward the exit, he stopped, turning his head to face Rebecca with a puzzled expression. Suddenly, Jeffrey embraced his mother in a hug that Rebecca had rarely witnessed, leaving her standing there in surprise and emotion. "Take care of Mom," Jeffrey whispered, his voice filled with emotion, but Rebecca couldn't quite grasp the meaning behind the hug. Although it was an act of affection, it also carried a shadow of worry for Rebecca. After Angela left with Jeffrey, Rebecca felt a sense of emptiness and fear spread through her. She decided to follow her son, finding him hastily packing a backpack. "Jeffrey, what are you doing? Why did you take this?" Rebecca couldn't hide her concern as she asked. Jeffrey quickly answered, trying to hide his worry. "I just wanted to go camping tonight to look at the stars," he said. But the explanation sounded weak even to him. Rebecca felt doubt creeping into her heart. The hug, the full backpack. Perhaps Jeffrey was preparing for something bigger than just a night under the stars. "I'm sure, Jeffrey, you've never heard me talk about camping before," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with worry. Jeffrey just nodded, avoiding her mother's gaze. "It was Angela's idea, you know. It'll be fine, I promise," he assured her before hastily opening the door and running out. Rebecca felt herself sinking into emptiness and fear. She turned back to the living room, each step a stab at her heart. Sitting down, she looked out the window at the deserted street under the dim streetlights. "What are you planning, Jeffrey?" Rebecca whispered to herself, unable to stop the questions from swirling in her head. Was her son really planning to leave his family? Why now? Rebecca's fear grew as the night fell, shrouding the house in darkness. She lay awake, staring out the window at the street, hoping that Jeffrey would return. But now, as darkness enveloped everything, her hope began to evaporate like smoke in the wind. "If he really leaves, I'll lose him forever." Rebecca's thoughts swirled in her head, a nightmare with no way out. Meanwhile, Jeffrey and Angela had a short taxi ride and settled into a small rental house in a neighboring town, which seemed like a whole new world to both of them. The house was temporarily renovated, far from the roots and rules that Jeffrey wanted to abandon. It became a haven for the couple, a place where they could live on their own terms. One evening, as dusk gave way to darkness and only a small lamp illuminated the kitchen, Jeffrey and Angela shared a simple meal. Angela placed her hand on Jeffrey's shoulder, her eyes suddenly unusually serious. "Jeffrey, we need to talk," she began, her voice low and full of concern. Angela looked at Jeffrey with a hesitant look before taking a deep breath and speaking. "Jeffrey, I need to talk to you about something." He stood still, sensing the tension in the air. "I'm pregnant," she continued, her voice shaky but determined. The news struck Jeffrey like a bolt from the blue, sending him into a storm of emotions. First surprise, then fear, but then slowly, acceptance settled in. He looked at Angela, who was waiting for his reaction. "You're pregnant, Jeffrey," he repeated, his voice filled with surprise and concern. "We're having a..." The next few months passed quickly, filled with preparations, plans, and growing excitement. Jeffrey, who had left home in search of freedom, was suddenly faced with the reality of becoming a father. He worked several temporary jobs, saving every penny to prepare for the baby. Meanwhile, Angela turned the rented house into a home, every corner reflecting the love and anticipation for the new family member. The free life Jeffrey had dreamed of gradually gave way to a new reality, where he began to look forward to the baby's cries, sleepless nights, and small moments of pure joy. Jeffrey often thought about Rebecca, Angela's mother, and wondered how she would react to the news. "I don't know if I should tell her. It's been months since I left without saying a word," he confided to Angela one quiet evening. Part of him wanted to share his joy and worry with his mother, but his pride in the distance created by the sudden departure prevented. As the baby's due date approached, the feelings of excitement and anxiety became uncontrollable. One fine morning, Jeffrey and Angela entered the hospital together, hand in hand. The air was filled with excitement and anticipation. Angela was quickly ushered into the prep room, and Jeffrey sat waiting, his heart pounding in his chest. Each minute seemed to drag on forever, each step down the hallway making his heart feel like it was about to burst. He stood there, waiting for the news that he was going to be a father. Hours passed, Each second seemed to drag on forever, until a doctor approached with a tired but sincere smile on his face. "Congratulations, you have a healthy baby boy," the doctor announced. In that moment, all the worries and fears melted away, replaced by an indescribable joy. As he entered the room where Angela was resting, barely conscious, and holding the little bundle wrapped in a blanket, Jeffrey felt a wave of emotion so strong he could hardly breathe. He stepped closer, looking at the little face for the first time, his eyes filling with tears of joy. "You are perfect," Jeffrey whispered, tears welling up in his eyes as he marveled at the miracle of his son. The baby wrapped in a soft blanket symbolized a new beginning, a new chapter in Jeffrey's tumultuous life. Angela, tired but radiant, smiled at Jeffrey, her eyes reflecting love and admiration for the life they had built together. However, the joy in the room was suddenly interrupted by the constant whirring sound from the machines next to Angela's bed. Jeffrey's heart seemed to stop, the monitor showing a flat line without a beat, a clear sign that something serious was happening. "Angela!" Jeffrey shouted, his voice shaking, and turned to her, but Angela did not respond. Her eyes were closed, her face blank. Confusion gripped Jeffrey, his mind unable to process the rapid change. "Angela!" he called back, his voice growing louder, the urgency in his words drawing the attention of the doctors and nurses rushing in. The medical team sprang into action, initiating resuscitation measures. Jeffrey was gently but firmly moved to the side, his hands still shaking uncontrollably, his eyes fixed on Angela. The cry of the newborn echoed through the room, a heartbreaking sound that seemed to echo his own despair. Despite the best efforts of the medical team, attempts to revive Angela were unsuccessful. Silence filled the room, broken only by the baby's constant wailing and Jeffrey's silent cries. The reality of the loss was too great for him to comprehend. Angela, the woman he loved, the mother of their child, was gone, leaving a huge void in his heart. The next few hours passed like a nightmare. Jeffrey caught up in the maelstrom of paperwork and decisions he had to make amid the pain. When he was finally allowed to leave the hospital, Jeffrey held his baby in his arms, a tiny being completely dependent on him, the lifeline that connected him to Angela. When he got home, the silence of the small rented house was a painful reminder. Sitting on the sofa with the baby in his arms, Jeffrey pondered the baby's face, each expression a heartbreaking yet sweet memory of Angela. "How can I do this without you?" he wondered, weighed down by the new reality. He didn't know how he could be both father and mother to their son. The reality of his new responsibility began to dawn on him as the baby's cries brought him back to the present, a sharp reminder that no matter how painful it was, he still had responsibilities and purpose. "I promise you and your mother that I will do everything I can, that I will love you, protect you, and raise you to be as strong and brave as your mother," Jeffrey whispered, an unspoken vow in the quiet room. As the night fell, Jeffrey gently rocked his son, singing a lullaby that Angela had chosen during her pregnancy. The pain of losing Angela was still a fresh wound, but the presence of his child brought a little comfort, a reason to keep fighting to live. In his heart, Jeffrey knew that the journey ahead would be arduous, and he wasn't sure if he could make it alone. But in that moment, when he saw his child's innocent eyes, he felt a small ray of hope bloom, a source of motivation for him to keep going, even without Angela by his side. In the silence of the night, as his newborn baby slept, Jeffrey found himself swept up in a whirlwind of emotions. The pain of losing Angela was still fresh, a wound bleeding deep inside, swallowing everything around him. Sitting at the kitchen table under a dim light, he made a decision that would change their lives forever. With trembling hands, Jeffrey began to write a letter to his mother, Rebecca. Each line of the letter was a testament to the love he felt for his new son, Scott, and the unbearable pain of living without Angela. He explained that life was now a dark day, as if the sun had set and would never rise again. The letter revealed Scott's birth, Angela's tragic death, and Jeffrey's painful decision to leave Scott in Rebecca's care. "Mom, I trust you the most to take care of Scott, to love and protect him as your own," Jeffrey wrote, tears staining the paper. When he finished the letter, he gently placed Scott in a basket lined with soft blankets. He got into the small car Angela had helped him buy and drove to Rebecca's house under the cover of darkness. Every step was an effort, a fight against the urge to turn around and hug him and never let. But the memory of Angela, the promise he had made to her in his final moments to protect and care for Scott, pushed him forward. When he arrived at the old house where he had grown up, Jeffrey carefully placed the basket by the front door, the letter lying beside Scott as a silent plea for Rebecca to understand his decision. "I hope you can forgive me someday. I know you will take good care of Scott," he wrote. Not daring to look back, afraid that her resolve would crumble, Jeffrey walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the night, leaving her heart and her son behind. The next morning, when Rebecca opened the door, she found Scott in the basket. At first it was surprise, then shock, then understanding as she read Jeffrey's letter. Each line was like an attack, revealing the pain and loss Jeffrey had experienced. The helplessness of not being able to see a future for himself, but the yearning for a better future for Scott. As she held Scott in her arms, Rebecca cried, not only because of the sadness of knowing Jeffrey was drowning in his own world of suffering, but also because of the sweet joy of having Scott, a part of her son, by her side. Between her tears, Rebecca silently promised Jeffrey, wherever he was, "I will take care of Scott. I will love Scott with all my heart as I have loved you, and I will always wait for the day you come back to us." As the sun rose, a gentle light illuminated the room, bringing new hope, a new beginning, and the promise of an unbreakable love. Rebecca knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also believed that together with Scott, they could overcome any hardship, and that maybe, just maybe, one day Jeffrey would find his way back to them. Years since that morning, Rebecca cared for Scott with all her love and devotion. She always tried to be both mother and guide to the boy, keeping the truth about Scott's origins a secret, a burden she carried in her heart with love and sadness. Now at 5 years old, Scott was a child full of joy, a bright smile that lit up any room and a clear laugh that spread joy throughout the house. He had curious eyes that were always looking for new adventures and intelligence that amazed Rebecca every day. "Mommy, why is the sky blue?" Scott would often ask, or "what does the wind blow?" His questions never dried up, and Rebecca did her best to answer them. She taught Scott not only lessons from books, but also lessons about life. She told him stories about their family, leaving out only the heartbreaking part about his father, and taught him the importance of kindness, honesty, and courage. "Scott, being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about facing your fear and doing the right," she would say, looking deep into his eyes, absorbing every word. While Scott grew up under Rebecca's care, Jeffrey remained a distant figure in his life. He often lurked in the shadows, watching from afar whenever Rebecca went out with Scott. Watching his son play, laugh, and run around filled Jeffrey with a mixture of joy. He marveled at Scott's maturity and his resemblance to Angela, but each watch was also a reminder of everything he had lost. Jeffrey never approached, never made himself known. He contented himself with watching from afar, believing it was, "You're happy, you're safe, that's all that matters," Jeffrey told himself, trying to believe he had made the right decision in leaving Scott with Rebecca. But missing his son was always an endless void, a black hole that sucked all the joy out of his life. One afternoon, while watching Scott play at the park under Rebecca's supervision, Jeffrey wondered, what will the future hold? Will Scott hate me for abandoning him? Will he understand why I did this? These questions haunted him and made him wonder whether he should reveal himself to Scott. The nightmare of facing the truth increasingly tormented Jeffrey. while his hesitation continued to drag him into an uncertain wait. Meanwhile, Rebecca slowly watched Scott grow up with hope. She knew that one day she would have to tell him the truth about his father, but she also feared when that moment would come. She saw him become smarter and kinder, stronger each day, but she also felt the fear that the truth would hurt him. Rebecca's heart is filled with a lingering anxiety as she thinks about how to explain things to Jeffrey without breaking his heart. She fears what the truth will do to Scott, though these fears do not deter the love and protection that both Rebecca provides a constant presence and unwavering love, while Jeffrey maintains a distant watch, each playing their own role in Scott's life, connecting their fates in ways Scott cannot yet recognize. As time passes, Scott turns 15 and carries not only the legacy of his parents, but also the rebellion that comes with puberty. He is a free-spirited young man with a thirst for independence that often puts him at odds with Rebecca's rules. Although their arguments are often tense, they never cross the line of disrespect, reflecting the depth of their bond. One hot summer afternoon, one of these arguments broke out in the kitchen. Scott expressed his desire to attend a music festival with his school friends, something Rebecca considered unwise given the context and environment of questionable influence. "Scott, I'm just worried about you. That festival is not the place for a young boy like you," Rebecca tried to explain in a voice filled with concern and love. "Grandma, I'm 15. I know how to take care of myself. Do you trust me?" Scott's tone escalated, but his eyes revealed a desire to understand, not to confront. "I just want some freedom to feel like I can make my own decisions." Rebecca sighed as she looked at her rapidly growing nephew. "I trust you, Scott. But the world is a big place out there, and I don't trust it completely." Deep down, she knew that Scott's desire for independence was natural, but the fear of losing him somehow prevented her from letting go completely. In this tense moment, when emotions were running high, Scott suddenly turned pale, clutching his sides with a look of intense pain on his face. "Grandma, I feel pain," he whispered, his voice weak. "Something is wrong with my body." Rebecca immediately became worried and moved closer to Scott. "Scott, what happened? Tell Grandma, so she can help you." Every word she spoke was filled with concern as she saw Scott struggling with pain that she did not understand the cause. Without hesitation, Rebecca called an ambulance and accompanied Scott to the hospital, where he was quickly diagnosed with acute kidney failure. The doctors explained that this was a condition he had inherited from his mother, Angela, who had been dealing with chronic kidney disease. Jeffrey had mentioned it briefly in his letter, but Rebecca had never imagined that it would appear in Scott. While Scott is in treatment, Rebecca ponders the paradoxes of fate, the way history seems to repeat itself in ways she could never have predicted. "Why didn't I tell you about your dad?" Rebecca wonders, chastising herself for not sharing the full truth with Scott, perhaps to better prepare him for challenges like this. As Scott recovers in the hospital, he looks at Rebecca with new eyes. The physical pain has exposed a vulnerability he rarely shows others. "Grandma, I didn't know this could happen to me," he says. "The doctors tell him the condition is genetic. Did you know about this?" Scott's question is filled with curiosity and fear, a cry for answers. Rebecca takes Scott's hand, deciding it's time to open up and share the story of Jeffrey, Angela, and all the choices and sacrifices that have led to this moment. "Scott, there is much about your father and mother that you need to know. It is a story of love, loss, but most of all, hope. And it begins with me, with you, and with a decision that changed our lives." As Scott recovered in the hospital, the soft light of dawn filtered through the windows, creating an atmosphere of peace and reflection. Rebecca sat by his bedside, taking a deep breath before beginning to tell the story that she had kept hidden for many years. "Scott, your father, Jeffrey, was a young man full of life and dreams, just like you. but he also faced many hardships and internal struggles that led to difficult decisions. Rebecca began her story carefully, trying to prepare her nephew for the emotional journey they were about to embark on. Scott, his face filled with curiosity and a little worry, listened attentively. And your mother, Angela, was an amazing, strong, loving woman. She and your father loved you more than anything. But unfortunately, after you were born, she suffered complications that prevented her from staying with us for long. Rebecca's voice trembles with emotion as she recalls the painful moments, but she continues steadfastly to give Scott the answers he deserves. What about your father? Why did he leave us and decide to disappear from your life and never come back? Scott asks. Each answer Rebecca gives openings new questions, new doubts. Rebecca explains Jeffrey's heartbreaking decision to abandon Scott to ensure a better future for him. Jeffrey thought it was the only way to ensure you had a better life, even if it meant sacrificing his own happiness and the chance to see you grow up. Rebecca's narration is interspersed with moments of silence, as Scott digests the information, sometimes teary-eyed, sometimes thoughtful. And he never made an effort to see me afterwards to see how I was doing, Scott says, the question carrying an emotional complexity beyond his years. I'm sure he watched us from afar, making sure you were okay but never getting close. That's who your father was. I believe everything he did was out of insecurity, thinking he wasn't good enough to be your father. Rebecca's story was interrupted by the arrival of a nurse named Mariana, bearing news of Scott's condition. We need to consider a kidney transplant, she said with a serious expression, preparing them for the gravity of the situation. The news was a blow to Rebecca and Scott, a cruel reminder that Angela's chronic kidney disease had not only left its mark on Scott's past, but also affected his present and future. Without hesitation, Rebecca offered to be Scott's kidney donor. I'll do anything for you, she said with determination. But tests showed she was incompatible and no other family members or neighbors were willing to help. The search for a suitable donor was becoming increasingly difficult, with each negative result weighing down on Rebecca. What are we going to do, Grandma? Scott asked, his voice weak but filled with the resilience Rebecca knew he had inherited from his parents. I'm so scared, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I wish my dad was here with you. Rebecca took Scott's hand, her eyes determined despite her fear. We're not giving up, Scott. We're going to find a donor for you no matter what. In the soft light that filtered through the hospital curtains, the clinic was a cozy yet anxious space. Rebecca sat by Scott's bedside, her hand tightly holding her nephew's, her heart filled with vague thoughts about the future. Scott's health had become the focus of all her thoughts and worries, each passing day a combination of hope and despair. As dawn broke, the fresh light of a new day seemed to bring new promise. In that moment, Dawn, the hospital's head nurse, gave Rebecca and Scott the good news. We have found a suitable donor for Scott. The surgery will be performed as soon as possible, she announced in a professional tone, but her eyes could not hide the excitement. This news was like rain in the desert for Rebecca. Tears of relief and gratitude could not be hidden as she squeezed Scott's hand. Scott, though still confused, his eyes began to sparkle with hope. Really, Grandma, are we going to make it through this? He asked, his voice filled with emotion. Rebecca smiled softly, trying to dispel the shadows of worry on her face. Yes, Scott, your parents are strong and we'll get through this together, she replied, her heart filled with love and determination. But what they didn't know was that an unexpected event was about to change their search forever. An event that would defy all expectations and bring new hope to an already bleak situation. The next morning, news from the hospital continued to bring surprises, opening a new chapter in Scott's fight for survival. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. Rebecca sat by the bed, still holding Scott's hand, her eyes filled with worry and hope. At this moment, Nurse Mariana entered the room, carrying a message that would change it. "Rebecca, we have good news. A suitable donor has been found for Scott. Surgery will be scheduled as soon as possible," she announced, her tone serious but her eyes sparkling with joy. Rebecca couldn't believe her ears, tears streaming down her cheeks as she held Scott's hand tighter. Scott woke up and looked at her with curiosity. "A donor has been found, Scott. You're going to have surgery," Rebecca said, her voice choked with, "I can't believe it, Grandma. Are we really going to get through this?" "I'm so happy," Scott exclaimed, his eyes no longer filled with darkness but with hope. Rebecca moved closer, hugging Scott, her heart filled with joy and relief. As they embraced in renewed hope, Jeffrey, who they had never known, stood silently watching from a distance. The discovery of Scott's health condition had woken Jeffrey from the invisibility he had felt. Seeing the strength he still had within him, Jeffrey decided to step forward, hoping to make up for the years of absence. Jeffrey underwent a discreet compatibility test, hoping that this decision could bring salvation to Scott without revealing his identity. When the results showed that he was the perfect donor, a complex emotion flooded his heart. Relief at being able to save Scott's life, but also fear of having to face the past he had left behind. With a strong determination, Jeffrey decided to donate anonymously, affirming that he would do this with all the love he had for his nephew. Surgery was quickly scheduled, the medical team working efficiently to take advantage of the opportunity to give Scott a new life. Rebecca, grateful but still skeptical of the unexpected turn of events, prepared Scott for surgery, encouraging him with loving words and the promise of a bright future. "You're strong, Scott. You'll get through this and be stronger," Rebecca whispered, still holding Scott's hand as he was wheeled into the operating room. Her heart pounded with a combination of fear and faith. Meanwhile, Jeffrey sent silent prayers from afar, hoping that his decision would bring Scott health and happiness. Outside the operating room, Rebecca waited anxiously in the supportive hospital staff. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the mystery donor she had never known, never expecting him to be closer than he had ever been. Inside the operating room, the medical team worked with precision and calm, every movement carefully coordinated to ensure the success of Scott's kidney transplant. Among those medical professionals, Nurse Mariana was always the one to observe the small victories and tense moments that characterized daily life in the hospital. She watched the surgery closely, making sure everything went smoothly. Her eyes often lingered on the young patient fighting for a new chance at life. As the surgery neared its end, the medical team began to relax, the first signs of success becoming apparent. Mariana checked Scott's vitals and allowed herself a small smile, sharing a look of relief and satisfaction with the surgeons. Another miracle today, she thought, proud of the work they were doing. When Scott was finally taken to the recovery room, Mariana continued to monitor him to make sure he was stable and comfortable. Now, a nervous but hopeful Rebecca was allowed in to watch him. As she entered the room and saw Scott slowly waking up, the overwhelming emotion made her shed tears of gratitude and relief. "Are you okay, Mrs. Rebecca?" Mariana informed with a warm smile. "You did well. The surgery was a success. We are so happy and proud of Scott's strength. Although the surgery was not easy, he handled it wonderfully," Mariana informed with a friendly smile. Rebecca could not find an answer, just nodded and continued to hold Scott's hand tightly. While trying to ease the tension with a normal conversation, Mariana accidentally said, "It's wonderful that Scott's father's kidney is a perfect match. It's rare to see such a perfect match." Rebecca suddenly stopped, her emotions interrupted by a sudden shock and confusion. "You mean Scott's father's kidney? If you're talking about Jeffrey, he never told me he was here. He's back? That can't be true," she asked in a trembling voice. her eyes wide as she sought an explanation from Mariana. Mariana immediately realized her mistake. "Oh, sorry, Rebecca. I was wrong. I thought you knew this mystery donor was Scott's father. I'm sorry I assumed that," she said quickly, her face showing concern. Rebecca sat down, shocked by the revelation. Scott, now more alert, looked at her with questioning eyes, trying to make sense of the conversation. "My father," he whispered, the words planting seeds of doubt, curiosity. They left the hospital with unanswered questions. In the days that follow, as Scott recovers, the two must confront the complex realities of their family. Scott now knows of his father's existence and the sacrifice he made, but he is also caught in a whirlwind of mixed emotions. On the one hand, he feels deeply grateful for his father's final act, an expression of boundless love. On the other hand, he also has many questions about why Jeffrey stayed in the dark for so long, why he had shunned them all those years ago, in what he believed to be the right way. Rebecca tried to explain her words, bringing comfort but also leaving many questions after years of silence and distance. Nations made the hardest decision of his life. To face the past he had left behind and try to reconcile with Rebecca, the mother who had taken on the responsibility of caring for his son, Scott. On a quiet afternoon, while Scott was at school, Jeffrey finally found the courage to approach the house he once called home. The old house sat on the shore of a peaceful lake where the golden afternoon sun illuminated the lush green garden. Rebecca was tending the roses in the garden, lost in thought when she noticed a familiar figure slowly approaching. Her heart pounded as she recognized Jeffrey, the son she had loved and lost for so many years. "Jeffrey," Rebecca exclaimed, her voice a mixture of surprise and disbelief. "Mom, it's Dad. He needs to talk to me," Jeffrey began hesitantly, his eyes avoiding hers, afraid of being judged and rejected. Rebecca listened in silence, her emotions flooding her, a storm of sadness, anger, and suddenly a surge of relief at finally seeing her son again. "Go to Scott. You deserve to hear what Dad has to say," she interrupted in a strong voice. Jeffrey bowed his head, accepting the truth of his mother's words. Mom's right. Dad wants more than anything to have the chance to talk to Scott, to be a part of your life if you'll let him. When Scott returned home from a day of school, Rebecca gently prepared him for the meeting with his father. She explained that Jeffrey wanted to meet him, but would not reveal too much to avoid pressuring him. Scott, though surprised, agreed to listen to what his father had to say. The meeting took place on the porch, under a golden afternoon sky. Scott stood straight, his features hard and his words careful as he faced the man who felt both strange and familiar. "Why did you come back now?" Scott asked, his voice heavy with the weight of years of doubt and uncertainty. Jeffrey took a deep breath, searching for the words that would begin to heal the wounds he had caused. "I know it was wrong of you to abandon me when I needed you most. You were lost in your own pain, and because of that, you caused me and Mom more pain. But I want to try to make things right if you'll let me. I don't expect things to change right away, but I hope that over time we can build a new relationship." Rebecca watched from a distance, her heart aching and hopeful. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also believed that their family had a chance to heal and rediscover themselves amidst the scars of the past. And somehow, that was enough for them to take the first step into an uncertain but promising future. "I know that what I say now cannot change the past. I lost myself, I lost my son, I lost us, and for that I am truly sorry," Jeffrey continued, his voice choked with emotion. Scotty's eyes fixed on his father, pondered every word and emotion his father had conveyed. "Why did you leave? Did you ever think about us?" Jeffrey took a deep breath, meeting his son's questioning gaze. "I was scared, Scott. Scared that I wasn't good enough, afraid of failing you like I failed your mother. but that's no excuse. I should have stayed. I should have faced my fears beside. The conversation between father and son began to open up the knots in pain, but also brought glimmers of hope. Rebecca, as the mediator, always there to support them, understood that rebuilding this relationship would not be easy but not impossible. The next day, they attended a small family gathering at home, where Rebecca had prepared a cozy meal to create a friendly atmosphere. Scott began to open up more. When he noticed the sincerity in his father's eyes, they shared old memories, things that happened during Jeffrey's absence, and plans for the future. I want to know what you were like before, about your work, your hobbies. Everything I missed, Scott said, his voice expressing his desire to understand and connect. Jeffrey smiled slightly, sensing the progress in their relationship. Dad used to work in construction, and he was always passionate about creating sustainable structures. Also, Dad enjoys reading and walking in nature to relieve stress. Rebecca saw the glimmer of hope in her son and father's eyes, and she felt her heart lighten. We can start small, step by step, to rebuild this relationship, she said, her voice filled with love and patience. As time went on, the family began to regain the connection they had lost. Jeffrey spent more time with Scott, participating in activities his son loved, such as playing basketball and going on picnics. Scott slowly began to accept his father, despite the many hardships and challenges ahead. One day, while they were sitting by the lake after a picnic, Rebecca looked at the two children and the man she'd endured for so many years. This moment, with you and your father together as a real family, is exactly what I have always wished for. My heart is at peace, she said with a warm gaze. Jeffrey took Rebecca's hand. Mom, the strength and forgiveness you have shown me is amazing. I only hope I can give the same to Scott. Scott smiled, looking at his two loved ones. I grew up with stories about you, and now I no longer have to imagine. We are together, and that is all that matters. Thank you, Dad, for giving me the opportunity to know the rest of this story. Their family, once torn apart by pain and regret, is now reunited, stronger by their shared experiences. Jeffrey has finally redeemed Rebecca, the resilient mother, and Scott, the bridge between the two generations, moving forward together, ready to face any future challenges with new love and hope. Under the bright afternoon sky, the image of their family sitting together on the porch, a symbol of a new beginning full of promise. Reconciliation is not only the return of a father, but also the deep connection between hearts that were once apart, creating a strong and meaningful relationship.